President with DLB Associates and former Chair of the Technical Committee 9.9 at the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning. Don, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Don, ASHRAE is working on the third edition of its thermal guidelines for data centers, and that edition is going to expand the allowable temperature and humidity envelopes for environments that contain IT equipment. A major reason to expand these envelopes is to allow for more use of airside economization. Can you talk about the relationship between economization and the upcoming edition?
Sure. So it turns out that there are a number of different applications out there, such as IDC, which would be an Internet Data Center, and an EDC, Enterprise Data Center, and they have significantly different needs. So an enterprise one has a lot more focus in on reliability, and typically an IDC has more focus in on energy. And some have an equal balance. So some of them are balanced towards reliability, some for energy, and some for some trade-off as a combination of those two. And so the ones in the IDC end and the ones that are more focused in on energy, they are looking for a broader temperature range so they can operate economizers for an extended number of hours in various parts around the world, and in some cases maybe operate an economizer full time. And so this is a tricky thing because it can really impact the cost of servers to make it be to where it could take these higher temperatures, and therefore that would force too much cost on those that want more reliability than more energy. So we struggled on trying to figure out how to address that topic, and we came to the conclusion that we should increase the number of classes. So before we had class 1 was a data center, and class 2 was a kind of an informal data center in an office building, like a technology closet or things along those lines. And so now we're going to expand it to have multiple classes for servers. And so some of those classes will be focused in more towards reliability and some more towards the energy side.
Mm-hmm. So how many classes is there going to be now?
More than likely there'll be 4 classes.
Mm-hmm. And in the existing edition, how many is there?
There are 4 classes in the existing edition, but only 2 of them have to do with servers. Mm-hmm. So we'd be expanding it to probably 4 server classes, so a total of 6 classes. Mm-hmm. And the original class 1 would remain the same, which is basically focused in on reliability. And the other ones will go to the broader ranges. And one of the other things that happened was we had 2 different types of descriptions. We called it the recommended range and the allowable range. And essentially, when we published it, it helped to normalize the industry because the industry prior to this did not have a vendor-neutral standard for temperatures. And as a result, they had to go based on each individual manufacturer. So we got that normalized using this overall approach, but few people really understood what the allowable range was. And so they all operate under the recommended range. And allowable is a much broader range than the recommended. But data centers in general, they're going to tend to be they're more risk averse than other kinds of people. And so they migrated towards that recommended range. And so the class 1, the first class that will be renamed, but remain the same. It'll still have the recommended and allowable range, and then the other classes will have a different set of circumstances.
In your presentation in New York, you guys mentioned how that ASHRAE has a chart for economization opportunities in different cities around the U.S.
Yes.
And I was rewatching the presentation today, and you mentioned that that chart has changed because of global warming. Can you tell us how, to what extent that has changed?
So ASHRAE has climate data that they store, and and based on that climate data, they pick an average year, and they publish it for any given location. And the way that it works is there's a 0.4% range. And that says that for the upper range, it says that the temperature for a given city will only exceed that temperature 0.4% of the time. And that's, again, for an average year. That average year was for the lifetime, so to speak, all the climate data that ASHRAE had. Based on the way things have changed, now ASHRAE is only using the last 25 years. So each year of new data, then a year drops off. And so it's an average for the 25 years instead.
I see. So do IT equipment manufacturers, to go back to the new standard, new guidelines, do IT equipment manufacturers already have products that will work at the upper ends of the new envelopes?
Well, first of all, just to clarify the original standard was basically written where it applies retroactively, which means it applies to legacy equipment as well. Because in a data center, you'd have a variety of equipment, and so that would be a risk. And so it basically covered all equipment. And the manufacturers manufactured to the allowable range. So it's beyond the recommended. It was still allowable. And what the standard stated was that the recommended is a reliability statement. It's optimized for that. And that a certain excursion, a certain amount of time outside the recommended and to the allowable is okay. And the allowable ranges are pretty high as they are, 32 degrees C, 35 degrees C. And there was questions in the first edition and the second edition, what does allowable mean regarding excursions? And as you have excursions, depending on the length, it can impact the life of the equipment and the reliability of it. So if you had an IDC, Internet Data Center, they may have a refresh rate of 2 to 3 years. A government data center, an enterprise data center, might have a refresh rate of twice that, for example. And if it had a refresh rate twice that, then those excursions could have a significantly greater impact on the reliability and life. But if you expose them to some sort of temperatures, but it's ultimately going to be replaced anyway, then it's less. So the new standards, where it goes beyond those original allowable ranges, the manufacturers have to retool for that in many cases. And that means resizing and re-engineering the servers. It may need a larger heat transfer surface. For example, 1U may become a 1.5 or 2U, the same amount of processing power in order to get that surface area and to optimize based on energy. So it means a lot more material in order to accomplish the same thing that was done before when it was optimized based on performance and cost versus now rolling a much more heavier emphasis on energy. And so because of that cost, that's why we want to have these different classes so it doesn't force everyone into more costly equipment. As the IT subcommittee, IT OEM subcommittee of TC 9.9 is the one that produces all these things, and them working through that, they really struggled to even understand what the costs are, because until you design it, you don't know. So it's really varied as relates to what it means from a cost standpoint, but it's above trivial, the cost difference, and could be significant.
Mm-hmm. And that would be for both the manufacturers and end users?
And end users. Because fundamentally, people would say, well, volume is cheaper by volume. Well, it's cheaper by volume, but if you already have volume and now you're going to add more material to it, even at a higher volume, it's going to cost more if you compare the baseline to baseline. And then with these multiple server classes, now the volume will go down because some will want to buy for the reliability, the original class 1, and some for these other pieces.
And what feeling do you get from IT manufacturers? Are they interested in making these products that will work with these new envelopes?
They are, and I think that each manufacturer has a different business strategy, and that strategy can change as to whether they think that their major market is one of reliability, or one of first cost, or one of energy, or whatever, any kind of combination. Some manufacturers want to be all things to all people, and some will want to have a niche, and so I think that it'll really vary. But I think in general, the IT OEMs have recognized that the industry really wants this, and that's why we've been deliberating for many months, the IT OEM subcommittee, to try to work out a solution.
So how quickly do you think the new guidelines would be adopted, given there isn't equipment out there yet at this point, and given that there's, like, as you mentioned in the beginning, there's still lots of legacy equipment in data centers?
So there's a couple of things. One is the ones that are focused in on reliability, they're probably not going to change. Those end users.
Not at all.
They're going to stick with what they have. The ones that have varying degrees of interest in energy, the white paper and subsequent book are providing information that's never been provided before as relates to consequences of higher temperatures. So it's going to have information about the temperature, as the temperature rises, what its impact is on power, and another area will be as the temperature rises, the impact on reliability. So what will happen is a number of people may decide to use the allowable range of the original classes, and that equipment's already out there. They'll be able to make an informed decision about how much of an excursion they can take into the allowable range, and they'll work it out accordingly. Those that want to go even further radical because they are in a tough climate, let's say, well, that's going to probably take longer because, first of all, the manufacturers have to design that equipment. But the magic in all this is where you can have a location where you have an economizer 100% of the time. Because then, regardless of the cost of the server going up, you're saving in it'll be a compressorless cooling system. So you save quite a bit of money in that area.
So the warmer you make the data center, more uncomfortable it is to work in one. Do you think that may weaken adoption of the new guidelines? Will that have any effect on?
I think that the EDCs, the enterprise data centers, typically going to be more on reliability, so they're not going to go to the high temperatures. The ones that are in some cases more entrepreneurial, an IDC, and in some cases they've got instead of a fail fix, they have a fail abandon approach. So if a server fails, just abandon it. So in that case, by definition, in a way, it would mean that they'd be on the floor less. The IT people would be on the floor less. Mm-hmm. So you really have a wide range of possibilities, depending on the application and the business strategies of that particular company. But some people set up a policy where they have, if it's a raised floor environment, where they temporarily put perforated tiles in the hot aisle for the aisle that the workers are working in, like the IT techs and so forth. Mm-hmm. And other people are considering portable spot cooling for the workers.
Mm-hmm. And it's a final question. So if someone implements, say, for example, there are now IBM would make servers that would work at the allowable range. But what if a facility is using maybe some of them? Is it possible to use only some of those servers? Would you have to isolate them in one part of the facility where you can raise the temperatures? Would that be possible?
Yes. Yeah, and that's a good question, because I think there's more of a trend towards not treating a data center as a single entity, but rather zones. And you zone it based on a lot of things, like different levels of reliability. For example, in the tier system, maybe you have zone 1 as a tier 1, and zone 2 and 3 are tier 2, and Zone 4 is a Tier 1 or some sort of range difference like that. And that would apply to that allowable range in equipment classes as well.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome.